So how does a sustainable diet look like? Well, this question was really put on the table a few months ago, at the beginning of this year, by the Eat Lancet Commission, and they defined a sort of global reference diet. And they said, well, if you think about these definitions of sustainability, we like to have a diet that is nutritional adequate, that can be produced within the planetary boundaries, within the carrying capacity of the Earth. And they came to this figure, and you see the circle with the 100%, that's the recommended diet. And the segments that, well, go far beyond the 100%, and some others are less than that, are the average current global diets. And what they concluded was that, yeah, on average, there is large variation in caloric intake, and we need to get to the optimal caloric energy intake that fits to your body size and composition and physical activity. We have to reduce then, on average, on the global scale, the added sugars and red meat. So this is an average. I stress that. I come back to that later. We have to think about a diversity of plant-based foods and little animal-sourced foods. Use unsaturated fats rather than saturated fats, and have limited amounts of refined grains and highly processed foods. And the intake of fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts should be doubled. So this was the advice of the Eat Lancet Commission, and below the slide you see a link to documents of this commission, which you might go over later when this is available on the web. Here you see another representation of this Eat Lancet Global Reference Diet, and you'll see in the table in the middle the different food groups that they have distinguished, and you'll see that they are quite rough food groups at a commodity level almost. And of course they have also more refined data, but it's also you can only make a global overview when you have data on that level of detail. And that means that, yeah, at the global level we only have quite crude data. So that's where they had to work with. But based on that, they came to these diets with certain macronutrient or macronutrient food intakes in grams per day. And you'll see, for instance, for the whole grains, they came to 232 grams per day. But if you look at the tubers or starchy vegetables below, they say, well, 50 would be recommended, and we eat much more nowadays. But they give a quite big range around it, indicating that the solution for what is sustainable might be different for each specific situation. And therefore they also made some nice pictures on how these diets might look like at different places in the world. And of course you can go over the link and the information in more detail to have a deeper look into this. Here they have labeled the same diets, but now they have shown, here it's shown in a bar graph, and you see on top the red meat and the starchy vegetables and the eggs and so on, the different food groups. You also see the 100%, so this is what we on average would need to do to stay within the sustainable and healthy diet limits. And you see quite sure that it's clear that the current diets, that's the height or the width in this fact of the bars, that for red meat they are far beyond the 100%, but the different bars show that it makes a difference whether you look global, which is the red bar always, or whether you look at East Asia or the Pacific region or South Asia or North America. It's different everywhere, and it's very important to take that into account. Some countries need to reduce drastically their red meat intake, while for others regions in Southeast Asia, you see there would be room to increase it. As long as, on average, we stay around or within this 100% range. And I think it's very important to realize that it's not one fixed diet that everyone should eat, but that there is a wide range of solutions. Because what we eat differs everywhere in the world. You probably have once seen these nice pictures of Pieter where he collated a number of pictures where people showed what they eat on a weekly basis with their families, and you see how much it differs all over the world. And the data where Eat Lancet makes use of, as I said, they are quite crude. So what we did in Europe, we had data available from 4 countries in a similar way, collected in a similar way, but these were not data on the production or the per capita intake data, but they were intake data at an individual level. So based on 24-hour recall data or diet records. And here they are, we see an analysis of the energy intake versus, on the vertical axis, the greenhouse gas emissions. And you clearly see the more you eat in terms of energy, the higher the greenhouse gas emissions. So the first thing is there is a positive association between greenhouse gas and energy intake. And the total energy intake that could be explained, or I should say the total greenhouse gas emissions that could be explained by energy intake was 38%, given country and gender. But if you would look at a certain level of energy intake, then the variation due to the food choice in different countries at the same energy level, that's in fact the type of variation that is independent of our body size, composition and physical activity. And that has to do with our dietary choice, our food choice. And that's where I would like to focus on most of the time in this presentation. And what this figure shows is that in these 4 European countries, and I should mention them, they are Denmark, which is, we would say, is Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Czech, which is the Central East European region, Italy representing South Europe, and France representing more or less the west of Europe. So we have some heterogeneity, and we see here that the greenhouse gas emission expressed in carbon dioxide equivalents per day ranges from 4.4 to 6.4 kilogram per day per 2,000 kilo for a 2,000 kilocalorie diet. So that really shows that food choice matters quite a lot if you compare these different countries. And if you integrate the information on what we see as sustainable diets, there are 3 basic principles, I would say. The first is reduce the amount of foods intake or adapt it to your energy needs. It does not always mean reduction. That depends on the population where we are. But at least reduce food waste and don't eat too much. And how you can do it, I made use of what our nutrition center in the Netherlands said, but that typically holds for a Northwest European country and population. You could make use of shopping lists and week menus, not to buy too much, so that you don't store it too much. You should look at best before dates, but better trust your nose. When it smells okay, you can probably eat it, and so on. Store your foods properly and wait and measure before you start cooking, because otherwise you throw away, you might do too much. We're always afraid that we do not give enough to our children, but maybe we should measure and just give them what they need. So that's one part, the amount of food, which is related to the energy part as well. We should shift to foods with a lower environmental footprint. I come to that back later, but the diet would then contain less red and processed meat, especially beef is very important then. They should have less processed meat and cheese on bread and increase plant food. So that's a shift in the dietary choice, even when keeping energy constant. And the social environmental aspects come in when you start accounting for food source and season. So choose foods with the low footprints, but that also could imply that you, at least in Western countries, think about the seasonality of the production, about the way of transport. Sometimes we fly in some foods here by plane, which is very ineffective and from the viewpoint of greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 production. And we could think about fair trade, using fair trade products or specific certified products. And of course, this type of fair trade or certification depends on the country where you are, what is the best way. And here I could only mention those for the Netherlands.